That's it, December 25th. 2025, it's the fourth year and day 305 since the full-scale invasion began. Welcome. For the daily situation report, in today's report, we see a storm shadow attack on a Russian refinery. This is a true novelty, with both sides making territorial gains, sometimes even past a tree line. And what we also see is criticism against the Russian General Staff leadership, which continues to struggle with the lies about Kupiansk. Just like many other things, war knows no holidays, just as I don't know holidays, otherwise you wouldn't be hearing me right now. But where there was a brief moment of normality was on the Western Front in 1914. Yesterday, exactly 111 years ago, there was a historic event on the Western Front that I simply couldn't leave out when reporting about it. The Christmas Truce, a brief ceasefire that, sadly, is still unique and revolutionary today because it was negotiated independently by ordinary soldiers at the front, not by politicians or military leaders. Yesterday, a little Christmas special was released for which I put in some effort to bring it closer to you. I would be happy if you check it out later as well if you haven't already. At the end of the video, you'll see it linked again in the credits. In the Sumi region, Ukrainians lost the area north of Andrivka. The Russians managed to retake the hard-to-reach area and are holding it again. Why? Because the Ukrainians were not able to maintain their momentum and could not bring the village of Kostiantynivka or Oleksivka fully under their control. This has now cost them this section of the front and will encourage the Russians to keep expanding. I bet that by New Year's we'll see another Russian gain here, probably somewhere in this pocket of the front. Why is that? Well, that's quite clear. The Ukrainians were able to recapture Kintrativka here once. They also managed to recapture Andrivka, and they also broke into Oleksivka here. Whether they are still at about this position or not is unknown. The last time I updated this section here was already a few weeks ago. But I also haven't seen any major geolocations that could prove the opposite. But the problem is they advanced further there, pushed in here to report more gains here. They control the area between these two river branches, but the Ukrainians advanced slightly, which is confirmed. The Russians tried to cross to the other side of the water from this side using speedboats, and the Ukrainians have often stopped them with Hamikats drones. I already showed that in the situation report back then. But now the Ukrainians have stopped continuing. They now had a good chance to advance toward Kostiantynivka, since the only other Russian connection was via their own mainland, and actually more or less only via this road here, which they used to drive down here, in order to reach Kostiantynivka again, because there's a river up here that was hard for them to cross. At the same time, they were also cut off from the rest of their army group here, because they couldn't advance any further, since, as I said, there was also a body of water here. That means the Ukrainians had a good chance of capturing this place here, but at the same time, they were also fighting here at Oleksivka and couldn't fully capture that place either. Somewhere around halfway through, they stopped, and since then, we haven't heard anything from her. If you leave these two places alone, the Russians will keep reinforcing them. Though it took time, they eventually launched and completed a counterattack. This area is now under Russian control again, and soon they will probably try to regain control here, as well as control over Oleksivka, if the Ukrainians don't take action. The Ukrainian General Staff confirmed a successful strike on the Novoshatchinsk oil refinery in Russia's Rostov region. According to Ukrainian sources, Air Force units attacked the refinery with air-launched Storm Shadow cruise missiles, with several explosions shown and the target considered destroyed. The facility is a key supplier of diesel and aviation fuel, or kerosene, for the Russian armed forces, giving it immediate military logistical importance. It was definitely hit, or is it just burning here? It's very unusual to see a Storm Shadow cruise missile in a Russian region, especially at a refinery. The last time I can remember seeing a Storm Shadow attack in the Russian heartland was during the fighting in the Kursk region, where the Ukrainians hit the headquarters of the 810th or the 40th Marine Infantry Brigade that was earlier this year. Seeing a hit like that on an oil processing facility in Russia is, of course, something new. So far, for the Storm Shadow attack, I'm relying on Ukrainian sources or Russian witness statements. However, there is no video of it yet. But there was also a missile alert in the area. Why? Why is it not allowed to walk around like that? In the open field? Think about it for a moment. Actually, everyone should know this, except for these Russian soldiers. Well, technically, they are Russian soldiers, but above all, they are Chechens. Chechens from the TikTok brigade have clearly stayed away from the front lines in recent years. Or they preferred to let members of the Russian armed forces be sacrificed, while they acted as spearhead troops or social media officers far from the front. Otherwise, they would know that you shouldn't stand so close together because the next mortar or artillery gunner will have an easy shot. That's exactly what happened. Just a few hits caused maximum damage. As the saying goes, pain teaches and shock motivates. Recently, Russian military blogger Romanov blamed the distorted situation in Kupiansk on false statements from superiors. He falsely reported territorial gains to superiors and was already pushing his limits. Many lesser-known people who were less openly critical have already fallen out of the window. But now he's going even further. According to his new account, the city was never completely under Russian control at any point, just as I claimed back then. Instead, it was only infiltrated by scattered groups of 2 or 3 men who had more or less mixed with Ukrainian forces in the city and were now partially surrounded. Romanov blames a dysfunctional leadership system for this, in which embellished reports of success are passed up the chain, distorting the actual situation and encouraging operational mistakes. This will eventually break the Russians' necks, especially if it continues on a large scale here. Longtime viewers might find this familiar. I explained this problem and its consequences in my video as early as January 17th, 2024, about the structure and tactics of a Russian assault company. When a regular soldier reports taking a building, a non-commissioned officer claims the street, the officer claims the neighborhood, the staff officer claims the district, and the general claims the whole city. Then the other units will, of course, also receive this misinformation and enter areas they believe to be secure. The Ukrainians wait for the ambush, questioning why a whole group is being sacrificed. Another Russian soldier suggests in a post that the actual situation near Kupiansk apparently isn't fully reaching the top leadership. He says that situation reports are obviously not being passed on correctly. No one really knows what's going on, and Putin therefore isn't getting the full picture. He sees Gerasimov, the chief of the Russian general staff, as responsible for clarifying this, but Gerasimov won't do it, because he already got into trouble once for having to admit, due to such false reports, that the situation at the front hadn't changed and that the reports were fabricated. Plus, one of his generals was recently named a hero of Russia by Putin. If he had lied, it would break his neck, and this man doesn't have that much guts, because that would also mean admitting that his own subordinates under his leadership lied to his face, and that he therefore also lied to Putin's face. Loyalty in the Kremlin still outweighs experience or competence. Soldiers of the 225th. Soldiers from the 225th Assault Regiment and 20th Army Corps say they have retaken 4 villages in the Dnipropetrovsk region. 2 occurred in the past 2 months and 2 more in the last few hours. The operation is said to have lasted more than 100 days. During this period, in particular, the 3rd. The 225th Assault Regiment Battalion held positions and launched repeated attacks to stabilize and regain territory. That's really interesting. 100 days for these 4 small villages here. You really have to consider it. There's now a drone death zone that's nearly impassable. We've seen large convoys very often, and they get destroyed in there. Ultimately, you can only pass through a zone about 40 kilometers wide, and in places it's just 20 kilometers, by advancing with small groups of soldiers. Very spread out, maybe just 2 or 3 men if that's even possible, hidden close together in foxholes, and then at night, moving forward a few meters, digging a new hole, hiding again, and doing this continuously over several kilometers. That's the only way you can get through here more or less unharmed or with a lot of luck. And that kind of thing drags on brutally, especially when we saw at the beginning of the war how often villages were captured and then recaptured. And that happened within just a few weeks. And now you see that it took 100 days just for this small area here. And with a large number of soldiers involved, that's actually a very interesting development in this war. You know, I know some soldiers from exactly this regiment who were able to confirm this to me personally, but that's not really the point. What I actually want to say is that the regiment is making an impression again. I've rarely seen such impressive progress in any other Ukrainian unit, from a more or less unknown defensive territorial defense unit to an untrained powerful assault unit that has always been able to achieve success so far or has hardly ever experienced failure. And that really means something. Ukrainian Phoenix Regiment units in Toretsk repelled a combined Russian attack using unmanned systems. Border Guard drone operators destroyed Russian battle tanks and a motorcycle group, halting the advance early. Here we are again in the so-called death strip. It's tough to get through here, especially if you're trying to make progress with noticeable vehicles, including motorcycles. Special thanks to ALGA crew channel members, especially Lieutenant Colonel Renicky, Robert Silla, and Dietrich. As always, thank you for listening. Subscribe, like, comment, and see you in the next situation report.